So I have already explained what is a side channel attack, right? In side channel attack, we want to infer some information by through some leaks or through some hints, indirect hints. Okay, so what are the, and here we try to form correlations. So here are some examples. If the data in convolution engine remains same across cycles, then circuit activity becomes limited, right? So for example, suppose we are doing some convolution operation. So we do first convolution operation, then we do second convolution operation. If the data between these two convolution operations is almost same, then what will happen? Power consumption will be low because data is not replaced that much. The data values are almost similar. So this leads to lower power dissipation. So that's why if you can measure the power consumption in every cycle, it tells you whether the value of related pixels are similar. Right? If the values of pixels have not changed much, then you can then power will also be lower, and you can easily measure the power, but you don't know the pixels. So by measuring the power value, you can find out what was the pixel value. So if you can, for example, find out if you have image of one person, right, and then next person, it may be like suppose somebody's X-ray or some other MRI scan. So if you can have one MRI of your suspected person and one MRI that you know, then for the suspected person you can find out what is his organ conditions. Now you know activation functions, right? We have discussed ReLU, right? You know ReLU function. ReLU is like this, and 10H is like this. Okay, 10H is like this. So they have conditional branching for implementing division and exponent functions. And so whenever you have branching, right? What is a branch? Branch means if else condition. If this condition, then do this, otherwise do this. Okay. So by measuring the timing difference, you can find out which activation function was there because of the branching. For example, here, like if the input is positive, then you will have this output. And if the input is negative, then you have this output. Right? So for negative values, output is 0. For positive values, output is something. Okay, so by seeing the timing difference, you can find out which plus so that was plus. You can also find out which which activation function it was, whether it was 10H or ReLU. Okay, so these are the ideas for determining the activation function. So see here the correlation was between power and the values of the pixels. Here the correlation is between the timing and the activation function, because timing is dependent on the branching operation, and branching operation is related to the AF. Okay, so if one leads to another, and if one leads to 2 and 2 leads to 3, then 1 and 3 are also correlated. Okay, and then again here you don't have to memorize all these correlations. Try to understand some of the basic ideas. We all know that filter dimension should be smaller than the input feature map. So for example, if your image is 224 cross 224, usually your filter will not be larger than your image. Right? Your filter sizes are what? Usually filter sizes are 3 cross 3, 5 cross 5, 7 cross 7, or maybe 11 cross 11. But your image sizes are much larger, maybe at least 28 by 28 or 224 by 224. This idea. So, and output size of one layer equals the input size of next layer. Isn't it? That is very obvious, right? Output size of one layer is input size of next layer. And Width of output feature map of the final array is 1 because each class has only one score. Okay, so transfer learning point I will skip because this will be now here let us see some more timing side channels. So if you have more number of filters and more filter size, the runtime of convolution will also increase linearly. Okay, this is understandable, right? If you have more filters, you need to do more computations. For each filter, you need to do some computations. That's why runtime of convolution and max pooling layer increases linearly with the number of with the filter size and number of filters. The more number of filters you have, more execution time you have. And with increasing stride, execution time is reduced. That is obvious, right? Because stride means how much you jump. Now, if you're jumping a lot, you're doing very less computations. If you're not, suppose your stride is just 1, then you are doing all the computations. But if your stride is 2 or 3 or 4, you are doing a lot of jump. Now, DNN latency is proportional to number of layers, right? So that is quite obvious. I mean, it may not be exactly proportional, but as you increase the number of layers, then execution time will increase, right? This is very obvious. If a DNN has only 5 layers versus it has 50 layers, the one with 50 layers will have more execution time. And now layer latency depends on how many operations it is doing. Of course, there are other factors such as memory access and so on, right? But in general, the more computations you do, the more execution time will you have. Now, on microcontrollers, multiplication with 0 takes less time than that with non-zero. So this is an important idea. So see, now you see that whenever there is a multiplication with 0, you don't need to execute that. Right? You can skip that. Whereas if both the operands are non-zero, you have to actually do the multiplication. Is it fine, right? It is very simple to understand. So now, on microcontrollers, by microcontroller I mean that like those boards, like such as ARM processors. So they are very simple processors. Okay. So now they have this optimization built that whenever one of the input is 0, don't do the multiplication. So you can find out if the output time, if the operation takes very less time, then one of the input was definitely 0. Either the input or the weight was 0. But if it takes more time, then none of them was 0. On CPU or GPU also it may be applied, but CPU, GPUs, like because they are very, very massive, they are much, much bigger processing units, and they have so many computations going on. You can't pinpoint one operation. But microcontrollers are very, very small devices. So there you can easily find out that what is the execution latency for single operation. Okay. Now these observations can be used to design a substitute DNN on the single accuracy. So the whole point is, suppose you keep on observing your competitor. Oh, they have done this, they have done this, then you leak the secrets. You make your own brand. You make your own products. Okay. Right. So maybe as you study more and more about neural networks, you will see these ideas yourself. At least the ideas on this slide are very, very simple, very easy to understand. Now let us see how do we infer the activation function. So these are the activation function. ReLU is simple. You see, in ReLU there is no computation being done. ReLU just sees the sign of a input value. If the input value is negative, output is 0. If the input value is positive, output is same. So here there is no computation happening. You just see the sign. So that's why it has low latency. Whereas tanh and sigmoid, they need to compute the exponential function. Okay. So how do we, what are the characteristics? Tan H latency is symmetric. Tan H is symmetric for positive and negative values. And Tan H latency is much lower at input values near 0. So here, near this, Tan H will have very small latency. Okay. So minimum values of Tan H and sigmoid are also different. So these are different observations made by different researchers. Okay, so maybe we may not have ourselves come up with this observation, but maybe if somebody else explains us, at least we can agree. Yes, it all makes sense. At least these observations, because at small values, these values will also become very small, right? So you can probably the processor can finish them in very less amount of time, but they may cancel each other. And here, because Sterilix sigmoid, they need exponential function, they use libm library. So if you can see, if the libm library is being called, if yes, then it is either Tan H or sigmoid, otherwise it is ReLU activation function. Okay, this may be difficult. Now inferring skip connections. So what is raw? Raw is read after write. Okay, so see, there are many neural networks which have this kind of connection. Like here, this is called skip connection. You are skipping this connection, skipping this input, it directly comes here. Okay, so here you see that whatever value we are getting x, we first write it and then later we read it. So that will lead to read after write dependency. Okay, so here, if you at this point we are getting fx, from this path, and we are getting x from this path. So when both these values are ready, okay, when both these values are ready, we will do element by z operation. So if you have this kind of dependency, you can be sure that there are this particular CNN has skip connections. Okay, see, let us take the other side. Suppose there is no skip connection. Suppose there is no skip connection. Suppose it's all just linear connection. Then what happens? You don't have to store fx anywhere. Then as soon as it is computed, you use it, right? Because there is every layer has just whatever value we produce, we immediately use it. But when you have this skip connection, then you need both fx and x. Okay, so this x will have to be stored while the computation of this ReLU is going on. You have to temporarily store the x somewhere. Only when this and this both are ready, then you can do the add. Okay, so when you see that the x was first we wrote it somewhere temporarily, then we read it. That means this is coming from a skip connection. If there was no skip connection, we don't have to write it, because we produce fx, and in the next layer we consume fx. Okay. So okay, now let us see some more ideas. So actually, if you had probably some more background on computer architecture, and especially if you had some more background on neural networks, slowly you will build over different courses. You will more easily appreciate it. Now, in convolution layers, there is high data reuse. Okay, so now can you explain it? Let us ask Anubha. How do you say that convolution layer has more reuse?
So because the same weights we are reusing again and again.
Yeah, because see that if you have sliding window based convolution, then you will do convolution over the whole of image, right? So the same weights are used at different locations of the image. That's why convolution layer has higher data reuse. because the filter size is very small and that same filter rotates over the whole image. Because of the data reuse is very, very high, cache is effective. You will have low cache misses. Similarly, FC layers, if you don't use any batching, then there is no reuse, right? I hope you remember that point. Because it has so many weights and all of them, the weights, it's like a matrix vector computation. So the weights of the matrix are used only once if there is no batching. So that's, and also FC layer has so many weights that it leads to high number of cache misses. Okay, so based on this, you can distinguish layer boundaries. That when you are seeing, if in a particular time period, you are seeing a lot of cache misses, probably it is FC layer. And if you're seeing very low number of cache misses, probably it is convolution. And of course, you can even go lower than convolution if there is activation layer, but I'm not discussing much about it. So right now, I'm just discussing about convolution and XC. Okay, so see, the whole point is you want to find out, so suppose some your competitor has designed a very good neural network. You can't know its architecture, but when it is executing on a particular cloud system, you can observe, right? What is the hardware performance counters? How many cache misses? How many branches, and so on. So based on that, you can find it. Okay, now it has very low cache misses for one period, so it is convolution layer. Then again, there is suddenly very high number of cache misses. Then there is FC layer. Then again, cache misses come down, so it has one more convolution layer. So like this, you can separate the layer boundaries, and with that, you can find out that your adversary, how has he designed his CNN? Can I also design the same CNN? Okay, so that's side. Okay, now inferring DNN architecture from building blocks. So these are different compact neural networks. So these are the names. So for example, SqueezeNet has 2 variants, SqueezeNext has 5 variants, MobileNet has 2 variants. And now they have different modules, like SqueezeNet has Fire module, and MobileNet has depth-wise convolution, ShuffleNet has channel shuffling, DenseNet has dense block, InceptionNet has inception module. Okay, so this is we already know from their architecture. Now, do they have branching? So based on these building blocks, just a minute. Okay, so sorry. So so these are the modules. I think, yeah, here you can see. For example, this is the squeeze net, which has FOIR modules. Now this is the mobile net, which has depth-wise, 3x3 depth-wise convolution. Okay. Similarly, there is shuffle net, which has channel shuffling, and there is inception net, which has inception modules. Okay. So what happens because of now all of this, they have their own architectural characteristic, right? So all these compact neural network, they use point-wise convolution. Some of them use branching, some of them don't use branching. Some of them have skip connections or residual connections, some of them don't have it. Some of them have asymmetric filter decomposition, right? So based on this characteristic, they will also have some architectural characteristics, right? For example, similar to this, they will have certain number of instructions, they will have certain number of branches, certain number of cache accesses or cache misses. Okay, so if you can observe all those, how many cache misses, how many instructions, how many branches, then you can find out which compact neural network is running here. It's like a detective work, right? This is all jasusi work. You have to see what the other person is doing with minimal amount of information. Okay. Now, estimating layer size. So we know that suppose initially our code runs on CPU, then we do the data transfer over PCI to GPU. Then GPU does the DNN execution in parallel. Then we do data transfer over PCI and finally transfer the data to CPU, and then the program ends there. Okay. So if we can observe the PCI Express bus, then if we can observe the PCI Express, we can find out how much data is getting transferred. So from that, we can find out what is the input size of the first layer and output size of the last layer. Because the input size of the first layer is transferred from CPU to GPU, and the output of the last layer is passed from GPU to CPU. Okay, output size of last layer can be estimated from that data transfer size. Okay, so this is mapped to CPU, this is mapped to GPU, and then in between there is data transfer. Is it clear? If you just remember our discussion of GPU architecture, you know how heterogeneous computing works. We have the serial part or initialization parts done on CPU, then the computations are mapped to GPU. Finally, you have the program closing parts done on CPU. So last for this part, last is this here, last slide here, ascertain layer boundaries. So find out where the layer boundaries are. In a single layer, locations which store output feature maps see only right axis, whereas previously written locations that are now read store input feature maps. Okay, so let us see this. So here, these are the memory addresses. Okay, these are the memory addresses starting from here to here. So see, this vertical lines is something which we have drawn after our jasusi work, right? After doing our work, we have drawn these lines. But how did we draw them? Let us see. See, if you just observe one layer, okay. If there was some address in the memory where we previously stored something, that means in the previous layer we stored something, and we are now reading them. That means they are the input feature map of this layer. Okay, so in a single layer, locations that store OF output feature maps only see generally one write access. Okay, because the output of one layer is stored somewhere. Okay, so within a layer, it will only see right accesses. For example, here green. So green ones you can see this as green. Then again in this convolution 2 we have this green area. Then this convolution 3 there is this green area. Then this green area. Okay. Now here this is red thing is filter reads. So here because filters were stored as in contiguous locations as array. So we read. See this slanted portion shows that at time t we read this. At time this. See at time at this time we read this address. At time this we read this address. So we are reading all of that. This particular memory address location that we are reading. So it shows that they're all for filter for the convolution filter. Okay, and glue parts. The same input feature map is being read for different filters, right? For example, if you remember, if we have suppose 128, we have suppose 128 filters. So all the filters will work on the same image or same input feature map. So input feature map remains same, but different if all the different filters they are applied on the same feature map. That's why here you can see the spread for the feature map is very small. We have very small amount of data for the input feature map, but filters we have so many. That's why a lot of range of filters is being accessed, right? The total filter data is very large because the number of filters is probably very high here. Okay, and based on the distinct addresses that are accessed, you can see there's a lot of distinct patterns here based on which they have drawn the boundaries. So if you can somehow know the memory address, of course it's not easy, right? Because CPU, GPU will not allow you to read the memory addresses that are being accessed. They will hide it from the ordinary user. But suppose you can somehow, if you can somehow read it, then you can find out which convolution, what are the layer boundaries. When one layer has finished, when another layer has started. Because the data of one layer may be stored at one place, the data of another layer may be stored at another place. Right? Here, see, the output of one layer becomes the input of the next layer. Okay? So that's the kind of idea. Yeah.